I'm John Spink. I'm the director of MSU's Food Fraud Initiative, and I'm an assistant professor. Food fraud is an incredibly complex concept. The discipline is very hard to understand. The decision to commit fraud is based by a human and based on very specific factors that individual human has. So there may be macroeconomic global trends that don't have anything to do with one individual fraudster. For example, if the price of cocoa goes up, but the fraudster deals only with corn, then that economic shift in cocoa has nothing to do with this fraudster's decision to commit an act. A question I get frequently is food fraud more prevalent now than it ever was through history? The belief is that probably per capita, per 1,000 people, it's the same as it's been all through recorded history. What we do see is that the fraud now is perpetrated on massive scales. With the speed of globalization, manufacturing moving around the world, and now product moving around the world very quickly, then product moves faster and larger manufacturing facilities can be farther away from markets. So just one production run of counterfeit product, fraudulent product, could be massive now, where in the past they were usually smaller. One of the most maybe complex and interesting fraud cases, food fraud cases we saw in the US is something that we've called honey laundering. And this started with tax avoidance smuggling, where honey was produced in a country, in China, that had a very high tariff into the US, and there were anti-dumping laws that went in place to charge a high tariff. But the bad guys transshipped that product through a country that had a low tariff, a low tax for import into the US, and they made $40 million over about a year. So that's a tremendous amount of money they made by just transshipping product and mishandling it. One of the biggest challenges I think we have is that the combating food fraud is very interdisciplinary. We need excellent food science technology to detect the contaminant, the adulterant in the product, but just detecting isn't prevention. We're not going to arrest our way to safety. We're not going to test our way to safety. We need to fundamentally change the way our systems operate to shift our focus to prevention. Our focus initially started very technical, looking at packaging components, looking at labels, trying to improve the traceability of the systems. We quickly found that was reactive. It wasn't getting to the root of the problem. We needed to fundamentally change the way that we looked at the systems. And that's, for us, we found the fraud opportunity, or what was called the crime opportunity in crime science, or situational crime prevention. It's a concept that's been studied back to the early 70s, and it really looks at the environment, to change the environment to reduce that opportunity for crime. A real key for us is looking at basic crime science. A human is just another biological organism. And when we think about it that way, we do think really we need to just deal with them differently. The human will not operate the same way under the same conditions every time. And so we have to understand that type of variability. One thing we've done when we looked at the variability of the human fraudster, the human perpetrator, is to really try to understand the base characteristics of the crime. And it's the fraud opportunity. Regardless if a company has ever been hit before, if that fraud has ever occurred before or ever will occur again, there's an inherent vulnerability. And that's the key focus, is that we try to reduce that vulnerability. Something that's really unique about food fraud prevention is the role of governments and the role of industry. And one thing that's unique is that food fraud is really a transnational crime. And if we look at the way that transnational crimes are managed around the world, say international organized crime, it's really through broad groups globally, such as Interpol. And so the response to prevent food fraud, to combat food fraud, really does need to be global, and it really does need to be through a law enforcement type of activity. Detection methods all have to be judged in terms of how they prevent fraud in the first place. The goal is not to detect product. The goal is to prevent it from getting in the marketplace in the first place. The goal is not to arrest bad guys and seize product. The goal is to get the situation where they don't even try to commit this type of fraud. And so that's a fundamentally different approach, and we're really trying to move forward to look at defining all of our roles in prevention.